precedent. Part 2 being poor, being black, 1950 to 1980. Data are not essential to certain arguments about social policy and indeed can get in the way. The terms of debate can be grounded wholly in preferences about how the world ought to be, not how it is. But in happened. We entirely indifferent to what has practice most of us are not, are prepared to modify our prescriptions if not our preferences. The problem is that almost no one knows what happened. We know the current unemployment figure, and perhaps what it was a year ago. But few can draw a sketch of the unemployment rate over the last 10 years, let alone the last 3 decades. Most of us know that divorces and crime and illegitimate births are high, and we have a general idea that they have been getting higher. But since when? At what rates? For other important indicators such as labor force participation, few people other than specialists have an idea even of the direction in which the trend lines have been moving. The foggy impressions that do exist are often mistaken. The purpose of the following chapters is to describe trend lines for some of the most basic social and economic indicators. We ask, how have the poor and the disadvantaged been doing? For one indicator, the poverty line, answering the question is a matter of counting how many people are poor. For all the other indicators, we must first identify who the poor and the disadvantaged are, and then, being poor, being black, 1950 to 1980. Obtain the statistics that describe their experience. And as soon as we try to do that, we encounter a barrier. Even if we had available to us breakdowns by income level, they would not answer the question. It will do us no good to ask, for example, whether unemployment among the poor has been improving, because we bias the answer by insisting that the subjects be poor. What we really want to know is whether the poor are successful in getting steady, well-paid jobs, or whether their children are successful in getting jobs. What we would really like is a longitudinal sample of the disadvantaged people who are poorly educated, downtrodden, disproportionately shut out of participation in American society. If social policy is successful, we should see improvement in their situation over time. The customary, indeed, virtually the only practicable way to deal with this problem is by using a racial breakdown, namely by comparing the trend line among blacks with the trend line among whites. But let me be precise about what is being compared. The use of racial breakdowns is common in the technical literature and in a variety of popular statistics news reports of the unemployment rate, for example, in the popular press. A discrepancy between the black figure and the white figure is usually interpreted as evidence of continuing racial discrimination. In the technical literature, the analyst ordinarily tries to find out how much of the racial discrepancy remains after other explanatory factors are taken into account. The presentation here follows the assumption in the technical literature that race is confounded with other factors. Given the published material, however, we cannot control for the other factors over 3 decades of data. If we want to take a look at trends over the long run, we give up that capacity. But we do know that blacks in the United States, besides being vulnerable to outright racial discrimination, are disproportionately poor and disproportionately disadvantaged in educational background, economic status, and social status. We may take advantage of this situation to use the statistics for blacks in the United States as the best available proxy for the longitudinal sample of disadvantaged Americans that would be preferable. The comparison is by no means pure. On the contrary, it is highly contaminated. In 1980, for example, there were 1.4 million black households with a money income in excess of $25,000, the members of which are surely exasperated at the impressions left by constant invidious. Being poor, being black, 1950 to 1980, statistical comparisons of blacks with whites. 3. By the same token, large numbers of whites are poor, ignorant, and vulnerable to exploitation. In 1980, 19.7 million whites were living beneath the poverty level, many of whom are surely exasperated at comparisons that make white interchangeable with doing fine. 4. The comparison is further contaminated because, although I often use the term blacks in the text, the data almost always will refer to blacks and others, with the others consisting almost entirely of Asians and American Indians. 5. I use black and others data instead of black only because there is no choice. On all except a few indicators, the data were not broken down more finely until the mid-1960s. The problem is that first, most of the others have been Asian, a population group that often is conspicuously above the national norms on measures of income and educational achievement. And second, the proportion of the others category grew from 4.5% of the black and others category in 1950 to about 16% in 1980, softening somewhat the harshness of the trends we will be examining. 6. But we are speaking of proportions. The comparison between black and white is an imprecise but nonetheless useful comparison over time between disadvantaged Americans in general and advantaged Americans in general, blurred by the members of both groups who fail to fit their category. This does not mean we must ignore the effects of discrimination against blacks, nor differences in black and white culture, nor the specific impact during the 1960s of the civil rights movement. To do so would be myopic. But I always approach the data with the preliminary hypothesis that a black-white difference murkily reflects a difference between poor and not poor, not a racially grounded difference. This hypothesis is almost never completely right, and the discussion in following chapters will repeatedly make note of that fact. But social and economic phenomena that we have too readily considered to be black in recent history are often phenomena that have been occurring predominantly among poor and disadvantaged people, black and white alike, and have been occurring at much lesser levels among people who are not poor or disadvantaged, black and white alike. Our explanations of why they have been occurring must start from this observation.